Welcome to our JavaScript web course. In this video, we will go over functions and concepts related to functions. We will look at a simple function, which is also referred to as a function declaration. A function declaration uses the keyword function. Followed by that word function is the name of the function. The name of the function always has an opening and closing parenthesis after it. The code to be executed when that function is called is placed inside the opening and closing curly braces. So the function keyword is similar to the var keyword in that it is used to define the name of the function. The rules for naming functions are the same for the rules for naming variables. Notice the layout of my curly braces. The opening left curly brace is immediately following the name of the function. The closing right curly brace is lined up underneath the function keyword. This is a standard layout for using curly braces. Notice I have the same layout in my CSS code. You do not have to use this layout. However, whichever layout you choose to use it consistently throughout the whole page. It makes your code easier to read and less prone to mistakes. In the real world, this function would be called when the user does something on the web page, known as a user action, which typically would be a click. And we will learn how to call functions in this manner later in this course. For now, we will be learning how to use a function, just working with document.write and having those functions execute when the page loads. So the code to be executed is inside the opening and closing curly brace. It is a statement and it is terminated with a semicolon. That function is called when its name is read by the browser. And here we see what is called the function call. All you need to do is to write the name of the function with the parentheses next to it, and that function will execute. So here is an example of that function executing in the web page. Functions most commonly take what are called parameters or arguments. Most people use those two terms interchangeably. Technically, the parameter is declared when the function is declared and the argument is passed to the function call. So here we are using the function keyword, show important message, and in parentheses, I have this string MSG. That is a placeholder similar to a variable. That means that this function takes one parameter. That parameter will also exist in the code. So we are passing a value to the function using this parameter, and whatever value that parameter accepts, it will also accept in the code. And when the code executes, the value for that parameter will be displayed there. Now let's take a look at the function call. Here we have show important message, and in the parentheses, I have the sentence, this is a very important message. Notice that I am passing string data, therefore it is enclosed in double quotes. So this argument, which is this is a very important message, will be passed to the function show important message. The parameter MSG will now hold the value of the string this is a very important message. It will pass it down to the document.write statement. When we view this in the browser, we can see the result. Remember, you can always check that your code is being executed correctly using the inspect tool. I right-click, I choose inspect. I expand my HTML elements. There is my script tag that contains the JavaScript. Notice it's grayed out. And notice we see the result of that function right here we see the opening and closing strong tag, and we see the text inside. So always use the inspect tool when you're generating HTML with JavaScript to make sure that your syntax is correct. Now we will look at an example of a function that takes two parameters. So here I have my function. The name is really cool. And in the parentheses, I have two parameters. The first is car, comma, place. Notice those parameters need to be comma separated. The code to be executed when this function is called is this document.write statement, and inside I have a string concatenated with the placeholder or parameter car, concatenated with another string, concatenated with the placeholder or parameter place. So again, these parameters are very similar to variables, as they will accept the value being passed, and that value will be interpreted when that function is executed. Now let's look at the function call. It's in the body tag because we are using document.write, which is content in the web page. Our function name is really cool, and we are passing it two arguments. The first argument, Tesla, is in double quotes because it is a string data, and we have a comma. The second argument, again, string data, the beach, in double quotes. When we load that page in the browser, we see the result. My car is a Tesla, and I drive it to the beach. Now suppose there was an error in the code to be executed in our function. Well, I guess the function wouldn't run. So before you start writing code inside your function, one good way to test that indeed you are correctly calling that function is to place a simple alert inside the function. Therefore, you can see that the function is being called correctly. The syntax for an alert is alert followed by two parentheses. If there is string data inside, which you would have for testing purposes, it needs to be enclosed in single or double quotations. This is a method of the window object. Because the window is a top-level object, you do not have to type in window.alert. However, it is not incorrect to do so. So here I have the function call in my body, show message, and the function, rather than executing some code, is just showing an alert. That way I know that indeed the function is correctly being called. So here we have the alert in the browser. It's a pop-up window. This is the Firefox browser. It may look different in your browser. You need to click the OK in order to see the rest of the web page. Functions can also be used to return a value, and this is very common. So here in my head section, I have a function called add num. Num stands for number. I am passing two parameters, num1, comma, num2. Inside my curly braces, I now have a variable, var sum equals num1 plus num2. Even though we haven't learned numeric calculations, it's pretty obvious that you can use the plus sign to add. A function that returns a value will also use the return keyword at the end of that function. So it is going to return the sum of whatever that calculation is, depending on the values that are being passed to that function. The function call is in the body. Notice that I have the function call inside the document.write statement. That is so we can see the result on the web page. In the previous examples, the document.write statement was in the function itself. So here we have document.write, and in parentheses, add num, in parentheses again, 100, 200. Please note that document.write can also evaluate an expression. It doesn't have to always contain text. Because we are passing numeric values to the function, those values are not enclosed in quotations. So the first argument, 100, is passed to the first parameter, num1. The second argument, 200, is passed to the second parameter, num2. Those values are passed down to the expression inside the curly braces, num1 plus num2. They are added, and the function returns the variable sum, which now contains 300. And when you test that on the web page, you can see that number 300 is on the page. We can also call a function from within a function. Here I have two functions. My first function is called show more. My second function is called show important message. Neither of these functions have parameters. If you look at function show important message, it is executing two statements. The first statement is a document.write statement. The second statement is actually the function call for the first function that we declared called show more. So in our body section, we have the function call for a show important message, which will not only call that function, but the function that it contains, and functions can contain several functions. If we test this in the web page, here we see the output of both of those functions. So far, all of the functions that we have looked at are what are called function declarations. It means they were declared using the function keyword. We also have what is called a function expression. A function expression means that the function is actually stored in a variable. So here we have the var keyword followed by the name of the variable, show important message. After the equal sign, we have an expression. We have the word function, and here we have two parentheses after that word. Then we have our curly braces. Inside the curly braces, we have the code to be executed, and at the end of the closing curly brace, we have a semicolon. This is the structure or syntax of a function expression. This is also called an anonymous function. Technically, the function doesn't have a name, which is why we have the word function followed by the two parentheses. Because it is stored in the variable, it can be used immediately on the page. Function declarations cannot be used until they are called. This is a more common syntax that is currently being used in the industry and became popular with the introduction of ES6 in 2015. When working with functions, those functions typically may contain variables. So now I need to address what is known as variable scope. By scope, we mean at what point or at what level that value is recognized. In this example, I have two variables that both have the same name x. If you had different names for your variables, which would actually be a good idea, this issue would not occur, but I want to demonstrate what we mean by scope, so I am using the same name for two different variables. When a variable is declared outside a function, it is known to have what is called global scope. It means that that variable is available everywhere. When a variable is declared inside that function, it is known to have what is called local scope, meaning that variable is only available to that function. So if I place an alert inside that function, I will see one value for x, and if I have a document.write statement in the body, it will display the global variable value of x. So here my function is being called and I see my alert. Again, alerts are wonderful for testing, and it's telling me that the value of x is 100. On the web page, the value of x is 1000 because this is global scope. Now, supposing I don't use the var keyword inside my function, now what will happen? If you omit the var keyword, the value will still be assigned to the variable. However, it automatically gives it global scope. So please don't do that. It's a source of a possible error in your code. Always use var when you're declaring your variable. So by default, functions always have local scope when the variable is defined inside the function. Now I am looking at an if statement. We have not covered if statements yet. I'm using it to explain scope. An if statement also contains curly braces. And if the condition inside the parentheses is true, the code inside the curly braces will execute. An if statement does not contain local scope like a function does. ES6 added block level scope so that variables declared inside if blocks or loops could have their own scope. The let keyword was introduced to allow for the creation of variables with block level scope. So the let keyword was introduced to essentially replace var in declaring variable name. This is useful in preventing errors in your code. It is still okay to use var in your code to define a variable. That is still a valid JavaScript keyword. We have just added let in addition to var, which allows us to define block level scope. Another contribution of ES6 in 2015 was the addition of the arrow function. This was introduced to simplify the writing of a function expression. If you look at the code, I have the function expression commented out, so we pair it to the arrow function. In the function expression, we have var, the name of the function, equals function followed by the parentheses. And then we have the opening and closing curly braces that contain the code to be executed. If you recall, this is technically an anonymous function because it doesn't have a name. It is stored in a variable. So what an arrow function is actually doing, it is omitting that function. Still have the opening and closing parentheses because we need that if we were passing a parameter. That is followed by equal greater than sign, or an arrow, or a fat arrow. So essentially, we're eliminating the word function and replacing it with this arrow. But the arrow is coming after the parentheses. You will see this being used a lot on the web and in textbooks also.